I'm going to speak about the gospel, because I've been studying the gospel according to these spiritual teachings, and it matches so much with my work, with things that I accessed in terms of evidence, and that I don't believe that Jesus Christ came here just to found a religion. I don't think it's about religion. And when we talk, and I think there's a mistake or a misleading conception when we talk about religion, because we Spiritists, when you talk about religion, we talk about religion in the sense of reconnection. So when you say that you meditate, or you sit in the power, that you pray, in our view, we are practicing religion, but not organized institutional religion. And Allan Kardec knew this confusion about the word, and he said, well, look, Spiritism is not a religion in terms of institution. It's a religion in terms of ethical consequences, moral consequences of what we see as a science, you understand? So today, we're going to talk about reincarnation, and you can say something very important. One of these studies in the past, that this kind of knowledge is usually, reincarnation is usually tackled at the higher levels, on higher planes. And there's a reason for that, because we cannot know about these things halfway there. We need to know this completely. We need to know reincarnation with the details, because if we don't do this, we can make very serious mistakes. All of the spiritualist speculations are welcome, but if we don't if we don't speculate through love and respect and responsible belief, as Dr. Gary Schwartz usually says, and I follow him in this kind of conception, we can get into trouble, very serious trouble. I remember a couple in France that they decided to suicide because they were having a hard time in their lives and they wanted to be born again. So they killed themselves, right? Because they have a very superficial idea of what reincarnation was about. And this is very serious. Hitler, I saw in a documentary by Discovery Channel, he was a spiritualist, a reincarnationist, according to the documentary. And they said that he believed that by killing all the people from the inferior races, they would be giving rise for them to be reincarnating in the only very beautiful and superior race in the world, that would be the Aryan race. So he thought that, at least what the documentary says, he thought that by killing all those inferior races, he would be being charitable to them. He would be helping them to be born in his only race, right? So the Aryan race. So that's why I think, I do believe what Jürgen says, it's something very important. And to deal with this kind of knowledge, in my opinion, this personal opinion, they send guys like Allan Kardec to bring the whole thing, right, in a country that could accept the whole thing, because the world couldn't accept. Reincarnation is a tough, knowledge for many kinds of cultures, right, that could not accept the idea of reincarnation. But he asked the spirits about that. We're going to do this. We're going to say, read something about that he asked the spirits, why not? Why not in other countries? If the spirits' teachings are universal, if the truth is here, why not? Why isn't this truth there in England or in another country? And then the spirits explain that very well. And things are going on the way they had predicted before. So I'll be using here from the Gospel some passages. And remember, in Spiritist, serious spirit studies, Jesus, right, first, he came to practice love. Second, speak about love. And then third, talk about spirituality. Because we are not ready at that time to, to approach spirituality in a mature sense of the idea. So as a master per excellence, Jesus Christ, he would not teach quantum mechanics to Galilean fishermen. So he came to them because they were prone to love and humility first. That's why the Spirit of Truth says to Kardec, well, Spiritists, love first. Because if you don't love, any other kind of piece of knowledge will be a reason for us to fight, right? Just like very well said by Susan Barnes, she was saying about, you cannot, cannot judge the conduct of mediums by some usual charts, because they're human beings and we need to have flexibility to understand the situations. And this is part of love, to be flexible, to understand other people's ideas, other people's different kinds of thought, right? So every time Jesus taught spirituality, you're gonna pay attention. Those who have already once studied the gospel, that would happen to few people only, and in a very private fashion. For instance, only Peter, James, and John were the only apostles Jesus would be explain or dare explain reincarnation, for example. And as he did, he immediately forbade them to speak to the others, because he was a master. Say the others don't have psychological capacity to understand this. So what we are tackling here tonight, this morning, is exactly a piece of knowledge that we really need to get into, because it's so beautiful and it can give us such great opportunities of growth, but we need to be psychologically more mature to accept, to understand, and to study it without, daydreaming too much. So Jesus clearly did not come to found the state religion or the like, although he knew the necessity of institutions. So our understanding of the word religion, as I already told you, is just reconnection, but not in no way institutional, clerical institution or something like this, right? Because sometimes we believe in a higher force, like the great spirit of God, or God, the supreme intelligence, the primary cause of all things. It doesn't matter the name. When we want to reconnect with something higher, we are practicing the search for the higher ethical approach. And this is so needed when we talk about spirituality. Now I'm going to share a screen with you with my PowerPoint here. Responsible teaching is something that is very related to this kind of knowledge. See how responsible Jesus was, right? Jesus had been on a mountain, and on that mountain, two spirits materialized. Of course, Christian and Christianity tradition don't think they materialized, but we know that was a materialization. There was a cloud that came from the sky in ectoplasm. There was a voice, there was a voice box speaking about Jesus, and two spirits, the spirit of Moses and the spirit of Elias, right, just materialized in the mountain. Of course, Peter, James, and John got crazy. They really, couldn't understand that. And Peter was really behaving in a way that I think it was John said, come down, please, Peter. Let's see what it is all is going to be at the end. And they taught, Jesus Christ introduced them, told, this is Moses. Remember Moses? It is in the Bible, in the Torah. And that's Elias, the prophet, the famous Jewish prophet. And of course, when they went, everything stopped. They were going down the mountain, right? And the text in the Bible in Matthew 17 says, and as they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, saying, tell the vision to no man until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. So this is didactic, pedagogical issue, right? So he says, they won't believe you if they don't see the phenomenon. So after I materialize after my death, okay, you will be able to tell them about that, but not before. They won't have the psychological maturity, the moral sense that you have had, and you're okay talking to me now. You didn't get crazy because of that. And his disciples asked him, saying, why then say the scribes that Elias must first come? So we saw Elias on the mountain, but the religious people, the scribes, they say that before you, right, the Messiah, Elias should come first. And Jesus says, answered to them, Elias truly shall first come and restore all things. But I say to you that Elias is come already, and they knew him not, but I have done to him whatever they listed. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer from them. And then the disciples understood that he spoke to them of John the Baptist. So John the Baptist, the reincarnation of Elias. And this is very logical because John the Baptist was beheaded. And that was the destiny of the prophets of Baal that he killed in the Old Testament. According to the Spirit of Emmanuel by Chico Xavier, if John the Baptist had been a little bit and not so strict to the truth and to the sincere and honest truth, life could be a little bit more merciful to him, and you wouldn't be going through this beheading situation. So today we're going to talk about this pedagogical procedure in nature, which is reincarnation. That's the Spiritist view. Well, it's something that for tests and atonement. Atonement because when you do something wrong, God or the higher forces don't want to kill you, don't want to make you sad, but they want you to understand the nature of your deeds so that you can balance them and stop doing something that is against other people's happiness. So there are 3 points is like the goal, which is intellectual and ethical evolution, wisdom and love, right? You need to conquer these 2 wings. And reincarnation is a good thing for us to do that because through reincarnation, the law of Newton, right, works much heavier than in the spiritual planes. Things and the response to our acts and deeds here on earth, they come very much faster than when we are in the spiritual realm. So this is a basis for testing our virtues, our capacities. We're going to be going through the concept of spirit aging that I think is very interesting too, and the cause and effect law. Well, of course, I'm just pinpoint some issues, some points for us to discuss, and I think in the breakout groups it's going to be easy for us to discuss some ideas because the books are there. We can study if you want to study reincarnation, go to the Spirit's book. And as we have a very short time here, I decided to just pinpoint some aspects of reincarnation that we could discuss later. So goal, the intellectual and ethical evolution. Well, and once again, Jesus says, Jesus answered and said to him, Jesus was talking to Nicodemus, a guy who was a master in Israel, a religious master. And Jesus was, Jesus was nothing. He was not from any religion. He was not from any traditional creed. And he said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Let's understand the kingdom of God here, of the higher level of our souls that is in our heart, in our mind, not exactly on a specific place. Of course, if you are very evolved, you cannot inhabit very lower zones. Otherwise, if you are there in a mission or something like this. Everybody, I think, understands this. And Jesus Christ was talking about this to a guy who needed to know about these things. And the guy, right, said, oh, come on, I don't understand. How come will I go back to my mother's womb since my mother's already old? And Jesus insisted, he said, truly, truly, I say to you, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. I put a lot of water in our PowerPoint today because the idea of water in reincarnation is present in the Greek culture, and they spoke Greek in Galilee because this was an imposition of the Roman Empire. And because of that, this idea of water, even the symbol of Christianity is a fish, because as once Socrates said, we live underwater. The real world is above the surface, right? The world that is more beautiful. It's the world of the ideas, of magic, right? If we may say so. So Jesus said, the first part I have just read said, if you're not born again, you won't be able to see the kingdom of God. So to understand things clearly. Reincarnation makes us understand things so clearly, so outstandingly crystal clear, that helps you a lot in many ways in your life. Therapies, understanding people, raising children, could be a wonderful thing for humanity if everybody could tackle this issue, but with not speculation, irresponsible speculations, to understand, because irresponsible speculations is something that refrain, that holds back the evolution of our knowledge of these things. So Jesus completes saying, that which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the spirit is a spirit. And that is said to be born of water and of the spirit, because our body is 80 and 90% water when we are born, according to scientists. And this is the planet that water begins represents the universal fluid in which we dive to renew in the spirit. That's the baptism. That's the greatest figuration of baptism. To be born is, right, to go into the water, to reincarnate, to renew our spirit. And this was in John 3, 5, 6. So the concept of the spirit aging is something that I picked from the idea of reincarnation. Psychological therapy from a deeper perspective, of course, pay attention. If we are old, very old spirits, imagine how many traumas, how many addictions, how many tendencies that are inside us, that if we don't tackle them therapeutically in a very loving fashion, we'll be involved with them non-stop for many, many other reincarnations. And the more we reincarnate, the more we suffer, because reincarnating is suffering for the spirit. Everybody knows the sensation of freedom, those who got out of body, had out of body experiences, for example, the sensation of freedom, the sensation of liberty we feel, the euphoric sensation of being detached from the body. So when you come down here, it's because we need to come down here to be happier there in the world of cause, in the causal world, right? One of the things we need to understand is the need to forget and forgive, because remembering is so difficult. Some people don't understand why we forget. Oh, come on, I forget, so why reincarnate? Because of this, when we forget, we have a brand new start. How many of us wouldn't like to start anew from today on, right? Making less mistakes, taking more advantage of those beautiful moments that sometimes we just neglected, overlooked. And the spirit release therapies, this is a very important tool, as I told you once, when the spirit is mature, psychologically mature, to understand and accept the idea of reincarnation. So I brought here from Allan Kardec in the Gospel According to Spiritism. He says something about this concept of the spirit aging that is very important to us. In my opinion, this was so good for me to understand myself and the way I should live my life, and so on and so forth. He says, for the spirits who are nearly at the beginning of their spirit lives, incarnation is a means for developing their intelligence. However, for educated individuals in whom the moral sense is broadly developed and who are obligated to recommence the steps of a corporeal life full of anguish when they could have already reached the objective, it is a punishment because of their need to prolong their stay on lower and unfortunate worlds. On the other hand, those who work actively for their moral progress not only shorten the duration of physical incarnations, I'd say incarnations, right? But they may all at once transcend intermediate degrees that separate them from the more highly evolved worlds. I think most of us here today are old spirits in the sense. I remember Chico Xavier saying privately to his friend, look, if you are a spiritist, if you understand reincarnation thoroughly, you're not young. And if you're not young, you're in trouble, guy. Because there are side effects for old spirits reincarnation. The side effects are exactly this. You feel all the anguish, all the phases that you are kind of bored of going through. So you need more nourishment. I was talking to a person recently, and identifying this person said, oh, I said to this person, you are very old spirit, so you need to grab this kind of knowledge. Otherwise, you can get into very serious troubles. You can go into drugs. You can search on in some very dangerous nook and crannies in your life. So grab this knowledge, accept it, and then try to understand it better. Even if you have to if you cannot wait for science to do that before, because sometimes, well, I'll see what science says. And I'll tell you one case about myself. When I was coming into school, from school into my home, and my mother was talking to a medium, and the medium came, looked at me and said, look, she was being influenced by a spirit. And she said, look, young man, they're telling me here that you like science, don't you? I said, oh, yes, I love science. But don't wait for science this time. Sometimes in other lives, you've waited for science and you wasted a lot of time by doing this. So search science, right? Look to science, but don't wait for it. You have to understand things before science because it will take longer. And if you wait for science, you know, you'll be very disappointed when you get there, as already has happened to you before. So it was very important for me, this kind of little talk, you know. And this is a speech made from a higher instructor in one of Chico Xavier's books. He's talking about psychological therapy from a deeper perspective, the perspective of reincarnation. And he says, for the circle of essentially Freudian scholars, all psychic problems of the personality boil down to sexual angst. For a large number of their colleagues, however, the causes extend to the acquisition of power and to the idea of superiority. These three famous schools of psychology we have. We will say, the spirits goes on to say, we will say on our part that although they all bear a certain dose of reason, the three schools are identical in that all of them lack the basic knowledge about reincarnation. Yeah, because if we're not talking about reincarnation, we're not, you know, going to search for the very deep causes of our problems. Well, we're going to be maybe on the surface of the water, just like in this picture here in the background, the surface of the water. And the only thing will hold the person will be medicine. That sometimes very good. Medicine is very important, but only medicine will make the person become a kind of robot, right? And the deep causes won't be tackled. This instructor goes on to say, this is in the book, I forgot to place the book, In the Greater World. We would thus conclude that even though Freud's analytical psychology and that of his collaborators have advanced far in the field of investigation and knowledge, partially solving certain enigmas of the human psyche, they lack the key of reincarnation to fully solve the problems of the soul. It is impossible to solve the matter definitely without the concepts of evolution, improvement, responsibility, reparation, and eternity. It is not enough to discover complexes and frustrations, to identify psychic lesions and mental deficiencies without remedying them. In other words, the simple examination of the outer layer is not enough. It is essential to reach the core and set about modifying the causes. And I assure you that in the work of spirit release, many people were healed from problems they had since they were young, since they were children, but with the very outstanding work of the spirituality in terms of tackling the issues from there, 1,800 years before, when everything began, when the traumas, the addictions, the maniac procedures began. So this is so beautiful to see the evidence of this knowledge when you work in practice with them. So they need to forget and forgive, which is very important, because if you start forgiving, you can remember. If you're not a forgiver, you'd better not remember, because you will see that you did wrong, lots of wrong things, and you suffered lots of offense too. So you'll be crazily feel as you are the worst victim in the world, and at the same time the worst criminal in the world. So it's something that it must be very carefully done, which is past life therapies, and must be very surgical. And they do this in the spirit release therapies, for example. Again, the servant, therefore, this is Jesus Christ. He's talking about something that shows the amount of wrongdoings we have in our past lives. Jesus talks about reincarnation indirectly all the time. If you fit reincarnation in his teachings, you understand everything he says. If you don't fit reincarnation in his teachings, you have to go into theology, you have to go into denominations and interpretations. But if you don't, just everything is clear. He says that there was a guy that he owed about a great fortune, 10,000 denarius, which is one talent, 10,000 talents. One talent would be today $10,000, right? So the guy had an unpayable debt, if I may say so. And Jesus says in this parable that the servant therefore fell down on his knee and worshipped his Lord, the one to whom he owed that amount of money. And he says, have patience with me and I will pay you. Then the Lord of that servant was moved with compassion and loosed him and forgave him the debt. But the same servant went out and found one of his fellow servants, which owed him 100 pence. And he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, pay me what you owe. And his fellow servant fell down at his feet and sought him, saying, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. And he would not, but went and cast him into prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw what was done, they were very sorry, and came and told their Lord all that was done. Then his Lord, after he had called him, said to him, oh, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you desire me, and you did this to your fellow friend, So that's the point. If when we start tackling reincarnation and our debt in the past life, most of us, mostly the older spirits, owe a lot, about 10,000 talents. So if in reincarnation we feel that we are very righteous people, we are very correct, and because of this, we start pushing people, right, and making people suffer because we think we are the correct ones, and religious people can fall into this temptation. They will suffer a lot, because when you do this, you suffer the consequences of your own faults. And that's why in another instance, Jesus says, for with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. And with what measure you meet, it shall be measured to you again. So karma, our karmic consequences of the cause and effect law, will be relative to our capacity of forgiving, understanding, and justifying other people's faults. If you are very hard on people, your consciousness will automatically be hard on you. And this will cause lots of things. Chico Xavier used to speak very thoroughly about the consequences of, for example, of birth problems, people that were born with very serious health problems from the early ages, right? Because many times were very hard. People that were sometimes religious people in the past, and they were very hard on others, and the situation could get serious, and the therapy could really heal this if the person is oriented to forgive. As I told you, spirit release therapies are very much into this. They usually go into this kind of, the spirits use this kind of knowledge to heal people, right? And okay, I'm finishing. Why not reincarnation? They say, well, sometimes Allan Kardec was, as I told you before at the beginning of our talk, why not reincarnation has been taught by spiritual communication in other countries? So he explained what the spirits answered to him. He says, they wanted Spiritism to appear in a country that provided absolute freedom of opinion. Their essential point was to have the principle accepted, and consequently, they did not want to be disturbed by anything else. The same did not happen with respect to the consequences, particularly the reincarnation that would have clashed against the prejudice of slavery and color. The idea that a black person could become white, a white person could have been black, and a master could have been a slave seems so monstrous that it would be difficult, or it'd be sufficient to have all the rest rejected. Hence, the spirits preferred to momentarily sacrifice the accessory to the main part, and have always told us that a unity would be later established about that point, as in others as well. And I think this exactly, it happens even in the Spiritist center. There are some Spiritist centers that they cannot face some truths. So the spirits respect, they don't talk about that truth there, but in other more mature groups, that conversation is possible because love is the first rule. And just to finish, I'd like to show you a speech by Dr. Gary Schwartz speaking about responsible belief, which is all about, in my opinion, Spiritism and Kardec's idea. Let's listen to him.
I read an interesting book called The Moral Arc. The author will be speaking next. And wonderful book. And one of the things that he carefully points out is that although, yes, there are horrific things taking place in humanity today, and there are things that we should not be proud of, on the whole, we have become an increasingly moral species. The data clearly supports this. And that science has played an important role in the evolution of our capacity for morality. And I believe that to make statements like that puts one in a position of great responsibility, because one has to walk the talk. And that any of us who are going to be standing up for new and challenging ideas, it's not just so much who wins, and it's not even so much what idea, what belief, what principle turns out to be the one that's accepted, but it's the process of coming to those conclusions, doing it fairly.
Okay, no, that's what I wanted to say to you, and I think this is so important, this responsible belief, right? Because we are in a world, the spiritualist world, that brings lots of speculations. But let's not take speculations as absolute truth. Speculation is okay, but as absolute truth, we need to be, if that truth is responsible, is moral and ethical. And this is all about knowing reincarnation in depth, right? I think that's it, people. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope.
Anne McGarity has said that she's confused between spiritualism and spiritism. Would you mind explaining the difference, please?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And if you had 2 hours, I could speak a little bit more about that. Allan Kardec once, he made a comparison. And he said that the only difference at his time, let's go into the origin of this, right? Spiritualism began in the 1900s. He said that the key reason that spirits used to say that reincarnation were several lives possible on one planet. And American spiritualists, for example, they believed that we incarnated once on one planet and only on other planets another reincarnation. And he said, but this was such a puerile difference, because compared to the objective, which is universal fraternity, because the objective, the real reason we are here for is for loving. Understand? So if we go on fighting, and he said, that's the only thing they call spiritualism what we call here in Europe Spiritism. So there is not, Of course, as time went by, the differences started getting bigger. Spiritualism became a religion in the United States, right? A kind of state, something that were respected by the state and so on and so forth. While Spiritism is something free, that whatever you can do this and that. But of course, there are some differences. When Allan Kardec coined the word Spiritism, it was exactly to differ from any other kind of speculation, because there's something that we fear a lot. I know you can do this test. We fear getting into conclusions, and we need to. We need to come to conclusions. But spiritualist people, you usually, oh no, let's not get into conclusions. That's not. But we need, it's didactic, it's pedagogical. What if I am mistaken? What if this is wrong? Be humble, change our mind. All right, but we need conclusions. We need to say, okay, things are like this. This is good. This is the reality. Let's go on, right? Otherwise, we will never come to a universal teaching of the Spirit. Okay.
Okay.